When I was 19 and 20 years old, I worked at a YMCA camp in the summers. I had a great experience there. I have so many fond memories. I remember some of the campers. One in particular stands out to me. His name was Leonard. Leonard was 6 years old. He was a cute little kid, full of energy. I mean, really full of energy. And great personality. He was funny, humorous, but yet he was a handful. And I mean a handful. So much so that at the end of the summer, the camp presented me with a plaque. It was the newly created Leonard Award for what I endured that week. Although Leonard was a handful, he earned a special spot in my heart. And I look back at that experience and that week with all the stress that it brought, with fondness as well. See, Leonard earned a place in my heart because I knew a little bit of his story. At the age of 6, he had already bounced around among a number of foster homes. He had endured some things that no child his age should have to endure. And his behavior showed it. Well, one of the issues that Leonard had was lying. I'm sure it was probably something he learned just for mere survival. But he lied a lot. He and I had many, many conversations about lying and why it's bad. We'd have a conversation and I'd say, "Do you understand what I'm saying?" And he would shake his head, "Yes." And then just a couple minutes would pass and then I'd hear another lie come out of his mouth. Well, I had another camper that same week. And honestly, I don't remember his name. I remember Leonard's name very well because I had to use it so much. So we'll call the other camper Jimmy. But I do remember Jimmy well. He was a good kid, very nice, kind to the other campers, got along well, honest and truthful. Well, one day we were in the cabin and Jimmy was looking around his bunk and he had kind of this frenzy about him. He's tearing things apart in his bed, looking for something. And I said, "What's wrong, Jimmy?" He said, "I had a bag of Cheetos sitting right here in the bed and I can't find them anywhere. I know they were right here." And so I began to help him look. And pretty soon, one by one, a few of the other campers came to help look as well. Well, as we were looking around for Jimmy's Cheetos, I heard a strange, mysterious crunching noise. And I turned my head, and it was coming from the direction of Leonard's bunk. I didn't see Leonard on his bunk. What I saw was his sleeping bag, covering over what looked like a human form. Now, super sleuth that I was, I came up with a hypothesis. If I lift up the sleeping bag, I hypothesized that I will find Leonard eating Jimmy's Cheetos. Well, I lifted up the sleeping bag, and sure enough, I found Leonard. But Leonard was sitting there, and he suddenly put his hands behind his back, very quickly. His eyes grew big, and you could see the shock, the fear, and the guilt all over his face. Well, honestly, I don't know if it was so much shock, fear, and guilt as it was powdered cheese all over his face. With his hands behind his back, I began to interrogate him. "Leonard, are you eating Jimmy's Cheetos?" With his hands behind his back, cheese all over his face, he frantically shook his head no with his eyes large. Said, "No, I'm not." I said, "Leonard, you know what we've talked about with being honest and truthful. Are you eating his Cheetos?" "Nope, I'm not. Really, honestly, I'm not." "Leonard, what's behind your back?" He pulls out his hands, covered with cheese, just like his face, and says, "Nothing." So I gently reach behind him and grab the Cheetos. And I say, "Leonard, what is this?" At that point, he couldn't deny it. He knew he had been caught. I would say red-handed, but it's more like orange-handed. Leonard had an issue with telling the truth. We've been going through Jesus' Sermon on the Mount in the book of Matthew, beginning in chapter 5, and it goes on through chapter 7. Today we're looking at a passage in Matthew chapter 5, beginning in verse 33, verses 33 through 37. Let me read these words of Jesus for you. "Again you have heard that it was said to the people long ago, 'Do not break your oath, but fulfill to the Lord the vows you have made.' But I tell you, do not swear an oath at all, either by heaven, for it is God's throne, or by earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. And do not swear by your head, for you cannot make even one hair white or black. All you need to say is simply yes or no. Anything beyond this comes from the evil one. In this passage, Jesus talked about the importance of being people of our word. A simple yes or no. And not swearing by anything to try to prove ourselves right. You know, we kind of do this today. No, really, I swear. Honestly. Really. I'm not kidding. We try to emphatically express our honesty. But in these words of Jesus, he said that's not necessary. We don't need to do that. Don't swear an oath. Don't make a vow. Just let your yes be yes and your no be no. There's a famous line in one of William Shakespeare's plays, Hamlet. And in there, Queen Gertrude, when she's reflecting upon a character in Prince Hamlet's play that he had written, she says, "The lady doth protest too much, methinks." We use this quote today when somebody is protesting so loudly against something that trying to defend themselves that you know it's really covering over guilt. It's like Leonard with the Cheetos. Leonard, are you eating Jimmy's Cheetos? No, really, honestly, I'm not. He was protesting too much. I knew he was. In this passage, Jesus said we don't need to swear those oaths. We don't need to make those vows. We don't need to be defensive about our words. Simply let our yes be yes and our no be no. And we don't need anything beyond that. Jesus called us to be people of our word. We don't need to swear or defend ourselves. A simple yes or no is enough. When we prove ourselves as trustworthy over time with consistency, as honest people, people begin to trust us. People know that our yes means yes and our no means no. If truth is on our side, we don't need to get defensive. We simply speak the truth and let the truth speak for itself. In this passage, Jesus also followed the pattern that we looked at last week, and that has been developing over the past few weeks. There are a number of places here in Jesus' Sermon on the Mount where he said, "You have heard that it was said," and then he recited some sort of law, rule, or cultural norm. And then he put his own twist to it, "But I say." And we see that pattern being something outward and external. You have heard that it was said, something outward and external. Do this or don't do that. And then Jesus' twist, "But I say," each time he brought that to something more internal, more of a heart issue, something in our minds, in our hearts. For example, we looked at, Jesus said, "You have heard that it was said, do not commit murder," an outward action. But Jesus said, "But I say, don't even hold anger in your heart." Last week we saw the passage where Jesus said, "You have heard that it was said, do not commit adultery," another outward action. And he said, "But I say, don't even look at a woman lustfully in your heart," as he spoke to the men among him. An inward attitude and character. And here Jesus does that as well. "You have heard that it was said of people long ago, do not break your oath, but fulfill the Lord's vows you have made." So, an outward action. You make an oath, you make a vow, it's something external and out there. But Jesus said, "But I say, do not swear an oath, either by heaven," etc., etc. But he says, "But let your yes be yes and your no be no." It's this internal attitude of honesty, integrity, and truth-telling. And when we live in that kind of character, consistently over time, We don't need to be defensive when we speak the truth. There's so many applications for this passage in our lives in general, in our conversations, in all our dealings, really. But there's one in particular I want to hone in on just for a moment. It's our social media era that we live in. When we think of being people of truth and honesty and integrity, letting our yes be yes and our no be no. Truth matters, and how we express that truth matters. In this social media era that we live in, it really highlights how prone we are to extremes, to bandwagons, and to conspiracy theories. And quite frankly, in many cases, it's destroying our Christian witness. And it really concerns me. We go on social media, and if we post an article, a claim, and it's not grounded in evidence, it's not grounded in truth or reality, and we haven't done our fact-checking, we're perpetuating things that aren't true. And then we follow that up with a post with a Bible verse. Well, it concerns me when somebody from outside looking in sees us post things that are not trustworthy, not honest, not true, and then followed by a Bible verse. How can they believe that Bible verse if we're posting other things that we're believing and getting our minds into that just frankly aren't true and aren't grounded in evidence? When we post those absurd articles without evidence or fact-checking, then the Bible verse, it's going to create confusion. Truth matters. And in this passage, Jesus expressed how truth matters. We don't need to get defensive. We don't need to argue against others who don't believe us. We just simply present our truth. And it's not our truth, it's the truth. I'm not speaking of any kind of relative truth here, my truth versus your truth. It's looking at what is true and speaking that. There's a little more to this story about Leonard. Leonard came back to camp the next year, and I had some mixed feelings when I saw him. I was really excited to see him because, like I said, he earned a special place in my heart. And still today, I kind of wonder what happened to Leonard. I still think about him from time to time. But I also had a little bit of maybe concern and nerves, wondering about what kind of stresses that week would bring. Well, it's fascinating to see. In 1 year's time, Leonard had landed in a new home. And it was clearly a home that was providing him with some stability, with some love and care and teaching, because his behavior was so different that next year. Leonard got along well with the other children. He behaved well, he listened, he cooperated, he was involved. But something that really stood out to me, that made my day, was during that week, Leonard came up to me and said, "Mr. Steve, David just lied to me, and I'm not happy." I wanted to jump up and down. All the conversations I had with him the year before about lying and the importance of telling the truth. I wanted to jump up and down, give him a hug, and say, "Leonard, you got it. You understood." And he did. He got it. He understood. Truth matters. And how we present that truth matters. God is a God of His Word. God keeps His promises. God is faithful. So let me encourage you, as a child of God, may you follow the example of the Father and be a person of your Word. May the Holy Spirit empower you to live out the teachings of Jesus in this world with an eye toward the world to come. And may God bless you. Amen.